We are in the second part of our series, third part of our series, Address the Mess. And if there's anybody that knows mess, it's moms, right? In fact, I brought some pictures. I brought some pictures of some messes that I've cleaned up. My kids are like, oh no. This is the time where they get embarrassed. But this was the mud mess. The mud mess, and the mud mess continues because I have 3 boys, 5 total. This is the chocolate, and then this is the chocolate mess. I think by the 5th child, she got into a lot because I was so busy keeping the boys out of the mess. So she got into the chocolate mess and then the lipstick mess, which is always a favorite. But moms, we know mess, right? We embrace the mess. We draw near to the mess. We're not afraid of the mess. And that's one of the concepts, one of the things that we're really talking about in this series, Address the Mess. We're not ignoring the mess. We're not denying the mess. We're addressing the mess. And I remember this other mess that we encountered years ago. So we have 5 children, and we made this big move from LA to Nashville in 2006. And our friend found this great deal on a moving company. It was almost a sounds too good to be true moving deal, which probably should have alerted us or alarmed us. But anyway, it sounded too good to be true. We said yes to the moving company. And after a month of living in and out of hotels and minivans, and we were so glad to finally be in our home. And we got to our home, but the moving van wasn't arriving. In fact, it was taking a long time coming. And they said, oh, we're on our way. So when it did arrive, the drivers of the moving van get off and they look kind of rattled. They look kind of shamed. And they begin to tell us this story about how their truck had been raided. Apparently, they had put our stuff on this moving van with some of their other clients. And these other clients supposedly were smuggling drugs. So, somewhere between LA and Nashville, the FBI had been watching them and tracking them, and they made a raid. Now, if you've ever seen those crime shows where the FBI kind of barges into a home and kicks down the door and begins to rummage through stuff, yeah, that was about what they did with our stuff. I wasn't there, but by the looks of my stuff, they ransacked our stuff. They went through everything, and they threw it around, and then they threw it back on the moving van. Apparently, the good news is that they did find 150 pounds of drugs on this truck. They are not ours. They were not ours. The bad news is the FBI and their scent dogs are not very gentle with stuff. So I remember they were getting off the van and unloading our things, and they'd bring out my dining room chairs leg by leg, my brand new chairs leg by leg, and some of the stuff they couldn't even fit back on the truck because the FBI doesn't know how to pack a moving truck. So the stuff that arrived was broken and damaged, and some of it was completely destroyed. And then there was some stuff that just never showed up. All of my lamps were mysteriously gone, as in addition to a lot of other things, they just never showed up. And we were left with a really big mess to clean up. Our attempts to, call and follow up with the moving company. Conveniently, they disconnected their phones, and we just never got anything in return from that mess, other than a big mess. And sometimes we think that church is this place where everybody comes together and they've got all their stuff together and there's no mess. But nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is that church is a place where everybody has mess. In fact, we've been saying that everybody has mess. Mess is one thing we all have in common, and we know a mess when we see one because we have mess. We have mess. But the good news is that we don't need to avoid the mess or pretend that it's not there. Together as followers of Christ, we can address the mess. We can embrace the mess together. So mess is one thing we all have in common. And maybe today you're facing a financial mess. Maybe you made some financial decisions, you're in debt, and you're facing this big financial mess. Or maybe it's a family mess. Maybe one of your kids isn't doing well, or your marriage isn't doing well, and you have this family mess that you're cleaning up. Maybe it's a relational mess. Maybe you had a close friendship, and there was a falling out, and there's just something off in the friendship, and you have a relational mess. Or maybe it's a health mess. You got a diagnosis that you just didn't want to receive, and you've got this health mess that you're now facing. Or maybe it's an academic mess. College students, you just took your finals last week, and maybe it revealed that you really didn't study as much as you should have studied. And now you have an academic mess, and you've got to figure out what you're going to do next semester. We all have mess. Mess is one thing we all have in common, and at some point, in some time, at some season of our life, we've all made a mess. In fact, that's why around here you'll often hear us say that everyone is welcome because nobody's perfect. And that's something we're talking about in this series, Address the Mess. But the good news is that with God, anything is possible. We don't have to stay stuck in the mess. In fact, Jesus doesn't want us to stay stuck in the mess. He loves us in spite of our mess, but he loves us so much, he doesn't want us to stay in our mess. And I think as parents, as moms, we get this. If we see our kids making the same mistakes over and over again, we don't just ignore it. We want to draw near to them. We want to help them so they don't keep making the same mistakes. We want to help them navigate in making better choices so they're not stuck in the same mess over and over again. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Christianity isn't about staying out of trouble and avoiding mess. And I think that's something that maybe contrary to how we've been raised. If you were raised going to church, maybe your perception of Christianity, and I think this is a lot of people's perception of Christianity, is that it's avoiding mess and staying out of trouble. Obeying all the rules, doing the right thing, going to church, doing all the right things, staying out of trouble, avoiding mess, and then we have this relationship with God. But we're going to look at today that it's something quite different. It's something quite different. It's far bigger and far greater than just avoiding trouble and staying out of the mess. God has something far greater for us. Even about what God wants to do in us and through us in spite of the mess. And we're going to look at an interaction that Jesus has with a man named Matthew today. We'll be in Matthew 9. So Matthew was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. And I love Matthew because he was someone that knew mess. But he wasn't someone who said, oh, my mess disqualifies me from God using me. He said, no, in spite of my mess, I'm going to trust God to use me. In fact, he is the one who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. So we're reading his story about how Jesus comes to him and introduces himself to him. So this is Matthew's story in chapter 9, verse 9. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum? When Jesus heard this, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they're righteous, but those who know they're sinners. So let's go back and look at this a little bit more carefully. So in verse 9, we see Jesus walking along, and he sees this man sitting at his tax collector's booth. So in that day, a rabbi, who was Jesus, a teacher of the Jewish law and teacher, usually didn't associate with tax collectors. In fact, tax collectors were notorious sinners, and they were regarded as collaborators with the Roman government. They were seen as traitors to their country Nobody liked the man who sat in the tax collector booth. Nobody. The Jewish people also often saw them as traitors because they worked for the Roman government. They had the military, the Roman military, backing them up in everything that they did. In fact, tax collectors earned their money by bidding on contracts. They would go into regions and bid for that region, saying, I can collect this much in taxes from this region. And they would bid with other tax collectors to win the bid for that region. So what they often did was they overcharged and cheated to win the bid. So they were seen as just not honest, cheating, overcharging. Nobody liked them. Nobody liked them. They were allowed also to keep what they overcollected. So the Jewish people hated them. They were considered the fringe of society. They were the disgrace to the community and to their family. In fact, they weren't even allowed to testify in courts. And in Jewish communities, they were seen as unclean. They were seen as unclean. And someone devoted to God wouldn't associate with them or even spend time with them. So we see Jesus in this interaction with Matthew. And Jesus says one thing to him. So as Matthew recounts this day, he says Jesus is just walking along and he sees Matthew and he stops. And his followers wait for Jesus to say something. What any other rabbi would say, the tax collectors, they're the lowest. There's no one lower than the tax collectors. So maybe Jesus would say, stay away from these kind of people, or obey all the rules and follow me so that you won't end up like this guy. But Jesus says nothing like that. In fact, let's look at what Jesus says again. It's very simple. He says, follow me and be my disciple. Jesus doesn't come to Matthew and say, Matthew, you got to clean up your act. What are you doing here? Why are you a tax collector? You could be so much better. Jesus just looks at him and says, follow me and be my disciple. He says, I see you, Matthew. I want to be in a relationship with you. I care about you, Matthew. Follow me. Follow me. So more than just a quick fix, Jesus wants us to follow him. He wants us to follow him out of his mess. He didn't give Matthew a list of rules, a list of behavior modification principles that he needed to apply before he could follow Jesus. Jesus said, follow me, be my disciple. Everybody watching is stunned. This is so unheard of. Of course, Matthew is speechless, and what we see that he doesn't even have, we don't see his response. Matthew's speechless. It would almost be like going into a prison and saying, out of the prisoners there, who wants to be police chief? Come and follow me. It was so unheard of. It was so unheard of in society. This is just an example of the grace that Jesus points and just plucks Matthew out of this role. And so now we're left to see how Matthew's going to respond. Is Matthew going to make excuses as to why he shouldn't be a follower of Christ? Is he going to laugh and mock Jesus? Is he going to audit him? We wait, but Matthew doesn't do any of this. Instead, we're told in verse 9 that Matthew got up and followed him. We're not told what he said or if he said anything. He just gets up and he follows him. He leaves his life of tax collecting behind. And it's not something that he could go back to. It's not like he could say, okay, you know what, Jesus, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to kind of keep this tax collecting business on the side, and then I'll follow you. Or if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to it. He got up and he left his business and followed Jesus. And I think this story is so unique because Matthew, so he wrote this story about himself, but where he places it in the Bible is pretty amazing. If you were to go back and read Matthew 9, he couches this story of his incredible, miraculous transformation, this display of God's amazing love and grace in between all of these stories on miracles that Jesus had done. And at the pinnacle, he puts himself, his own story, his own miracle story, in between these stories of God's amazing, miraculous grace. He puts himself. And then in verse 10, we see what Matthew's response is. In verse 10, he said, later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. I love that. You'll often see in the Bible, you'll see tax collectors and sinners. They're separated. Now, that is partly because these tax collectors were so despised in society, even sinners didn't want to be associated with them. They had their own class. This was as low as you could get. This was low. There were sinners, and then there were tax collectors. And then in Matthew, and in this story, he says disreputable sinners. So you got sinners, you got disreputable sinners, and then you've got tax collectors. And that's where Matthew, he's trying to point this picture to us in that he throws this party and he invites Jesus, and it wasn't all of the who's who in Jerusalem that he invited. He invites his friends, right? Matthew's a tax collector, so who does he invite? He invites tax collectors. He invites sinners. It's like the drug dealers would invite drug dealers. The gang leaders would invite gang leaders. Think of it, he doesn't say, I better go make new friends. I better invite the people that Jesus would want me to be around. He feels so at ease and so welcomed and loved by the grace that Jesus has poured out on him. He just doesn't have any social protocol. He doesn't have anything in his mind going, Jesus wouldn't come to my party. He said, no. In fact, that's quite the opposite. I'm going to have a party and I'm going to invite all my friends so they can experience all of this love that I've experienced. So he throws this party. He invites his friend. He's so moved by Jesus' compassion, so transformed by his grace. And he invites his friends. And what does Jesus do? He comes. He comes to the party. Amazing, right? Jesus comes to this party. He doesn't say, Matthew, get a new group of friends. Matthew, have your friends not do their tax collector stuff while I'm there. Or Matthew, you know what, I really shouldn't be associating with those type of people, so maybe we do it somewhere else where nobody can watch me because I've got this position in Jerusalem that people are watching me. He doesn't do any of that. In fact, he has this party with all of these people, and Jesus comes. And parties in those days, they were held in open courtyards, so everybody's watching. It was like a community affair. It wasn't like you come into my house and we can close the blinds and then you can mix with my friends. This was like an outdoor party, and everybody is watching. Everybody is watching, and they're going to say, okay, what's Jesus going to do? Is he going to come and draw the line in the sand and say, you're in and you're out? You guys clean up your act. You're the disgrace of the community. You're the embarrassment for the Jewish people. He doesn't do any of that. In fact, as we read on, in verse 11, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples. So they don't go and ask Jesus. They're like, we don't want to ask Jesus. They go and ask his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum? And Jesus responds. Jesus said, let me take care of this. I'm going to handle this. When Jesus heard this, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they're righteous, but those who know they're sinners. So Matthew is saying, the Pharisees are asking, why does your teacher do this? And Jesus says, let me tell you why I do this. Because I didn't come to create this us against them, you're in, you're out, obey the rules and you're a follower, don't obey the rules and you're cast aside. I didn't come to create a community like that. I came to create a community where everyone is welcome. And in spite of their mess, they can follow me out of their mess if they surrender their lives to me. And I can change their life. It's amazing. God doesn't divide the human race and us against them. But to the Pharisees, they didn't get it. They didn't get it. They didn't get that Jesus came to make their hearts right, not just their behavior right. The Pharisees were really good at behaving well. But in this story in Matthew, we see that Jesus flips the script. He says it's not just about your behavior. It's about the condition of your heart. It's about the condition of your heart. So Jesus wasn't repelled by the mess. He was drawn to it. He created this environment where everyone was welcome. So the Pharisees, when they would get together for a party, they would invite other Pharisees. They would invite their friends. They would study with the Pharisees. They had their little Pharisee community. All their friends were Pharisees. They ate dinner with all their Pharisees. They worshiped with all their Pharisees. It sounds like the church, doesn't it? But Jesus lives completely different. He lives completely different. He says everyone is welcome. We have to create a broad place for the community of the hurting and the mess and the hopeless and those who are looking for hope. We have to create a community for them to come and find me in their mess, and then they can begin to take steps to follow me out of their mess. But if we create all of these boundaries, you're in, you're out, us versus them, then they can't even come in to find the hope and the healing that their hearts are desperately needing. So the Pharisees didn't get this, but Matthew did. Matthew did. So Jesus desires mercy, not sacrifice. Relationship, not just rule keeping. He's here for the hurting as well as for the healthy. So as we learn from Matthew, God can work in and through our lives in spite of our mess. In fact, I think that's where he works the best, because it's really not about us anymore. It's a testimony of God saved me. I'm a different person. He's changed me. He's transformed my life. And by grace, I follow him. So we're going to look at one more scripture today in Philippians 1. And see really what it is that God wants to work in us and through us in spite of our mess. In Philippians 1, this is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church that he really loved. He founded this church about 10 years prior, and he hadn't been back with them. So he hadn't seen them in about 10 years. And the neat thing about this letter, the theme of this letter is joy. And Paul writes it not from his beachfront property, not from his mountain cabin. He writes it from prison. He writes it when he's cold, when he's uncomfortable, from this place in prison, and he's longing to be with these people. And the whole theme is joy in this whole book. But we're going to read in Philippians 1, he really talks about how how to live for something bigger than just keeping the rules, staying out of trouble, and avoiding mess. In verse 3, he writes, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So in verse 3, he says, I thank my God every time I remember you. Now, if I was writing from prison, I don't know if I'd be thanking God for them. I'd probably be saying, help, get me out of here. Come save me from here. But Paul is saying, I thank my God every time I remember you. He loves these people. These are some of his dearest, dearest friends. And in verse 4 and 5, he goes on and he says, in all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. So there's a partnership. When you become a Christ follower, God begins something in your life. And it's not to make us better rule followers. It's to make us more like Jesus. It's to make us more like his son. So when we partner with him, he begins this work, and it goes on in verse 6, saying, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ. I think sometimes when we encounter a problem or when we're in a mess, we want to fix it. We want Jesus, just fix it. Fix it is now. It's something that we want right now. We don't want to wait for it. But Jesus says, follow me. To Matthew could have come and said, help, Jesus, get me out of this. I'm stuck in this tax collecting. I don't know the way out. Fix it, Jesus, and then I'll follow you. And Jesus says, no, follow me. Follow me first. Follow me first. Following him is a process. It's a lifelong process of surrendering our life to him. So fix it. Instead of fix it, follow me. And it's not an external change, but an internal change. So the goal isn't to make us better rule followers. It's to make us more like Jesus. It's an inside-out faith. So what is God wanting to do in you? What is this work that God began in you that he wants to complete? That's probably one of the biggest questions we get, or I get from people, like, how do I know what God's will is? Or what is it that God's wanting to do in my life? And Paul is he's tipping them off into what this is, that what God wants to do in us. And in verse 9, he gives just a hint. He says this, and this is my prayer, that you stay out of trouble and keep your hands to yourself. Now that's the moms made it up version, because us moms, we're really good at making sure our kids keep the rules. But I think we often translate that to our walk with Christ. Stay out of trouble, keep your hands to yourself, obey all the rules, do the right things, go to church, do all of the things that I'm supposed to do, avoid the mess, and then God will do something in my life. And he says, no, that's not it. That's not it. You're missing it. It's not to be a better rule keeper. And he goes on in verse 9 and he gives us this great, he says, this is my prayer. This is my prayer. So what is it that you pray for? When you come before Christ, when you pray, what is it that you pray? Do you pray for a better job? Do you pray for your kids? Do you pray to pay your bills? Do you pray for your health? What is it that you pray for? Because Paul is trying to get these people to think bigger than the behavior, bigger than the rules, bigger than what they do or don't do. In verse 9, he says, this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? Paul's prayer, this is at the core of what God wants to do inside of you. This is what God is trying to work in you. When you come into your relationship with Christ, God is trying to work something in you. And it's not to be a better rule keeper. It's to be a better lover of people. And when you become a better lover of people, when you shift your focus from keeping the rules, staying out of trouble, avoiding the mess, I'm in, they're out, not, you're in, you're out, us versus them, to being a better lover of people, that's the work that God wants to do inside our hearts, is to be a better lover of him and people. Then he goes on and he continues this prayer, so you may be able to discern what is best. So when you're praying a prayer like that, he gives you discernment. He gives you insight. He gives you a different lens to see the world through, and things become clearer, and your priorities begin to change, and he begins to lead you step by step to discern what is best, and you may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Christ to the glory and praise of God. Takes ourselves out of the equation. And I think a lot of the shift is the rules and the behavior and the avoiding the mess still makes us at the center. Still puts all of the responsibility on us. And Paul is saying, shift your focus to be a better lover of God, a better lover of people, that your love may abound. The behavior follows. You can't pray, you can't not, I'm going to do a double or triple negative, but you cannot not pray to be a better lover of people and sincerely pray that and have God begin to work that and continue to hurt people relationally. When you pray that God would make you a better lover of people, that your love would abound more and more, that's inside out faith. That's God working in you so he can begin working through you. So following Jesus as we close today, it's not about keeping a bunch of rules, avoiding trouble, doing what's right, staying out of the mess. It's not about avoiding something. It's about becoming something. It's about allowing God's work of grace to go deep in your hearts, not so you approach your relationship with Christ from the standpoint of obeying rules, us versus them, you're in, you're out, avoiding trouble, but it's God, make me a better lover of people. Make my love for you abound more and more. Make my love for people abound more and more. And that's really the test to see how much our love is abounding, is when we're encountering people that are difficult to love. So let's return to Matthew 9. So the Pharisees were really, really good at keeping the rules. They were good at doing the right things and making sure everybody else did the right things. But Christianity isn't about keeping the rules and avoiding trouble. It's so much more than that. It's not about avoiding something. It's about becoming something. The Pharisees missed the point. Jesus' main desire was for his followers to display his love to a messy world. And in Matthew 9, he shows this extravagant love in a messy world. And he doesn't draw lines. He doesn't say you're in and you're out. He shows this abounding love for all people. And he asks for that to be our prayer as well, for us to ask God and beg God that our love for him and for people would abound more, and we would create a community where everyone is welcome, because we're all in a mess, and it's only by the grace of God that we stand before him.